Welcome to Learn English with Sara. Today we'll listen to a touching and meaningful story called A Second Journey. This story will help you learn English through storytelling while exploring hope, love, and finding purpose again. So let's begin. The house at the end of Maple Street was quiet. Its paint was old and its porch light no longer worked. But every morning at exactly 6:30 a.m., a tall gray-haired man opened the front door and stepped outside. His name was Mr. Thomas. He was 65 years old, and for the past 5 years he had lived alone. His small house in Ohio had only 2 rooms and a kitchen. On the porch stood one wooden chair, the same chair where he and his late wife Margaret used to sit every evening drinking tea and talking about their day. Those were the happiest times of his life. But after Margaret's death, the house became silent. The walls were still strong, the bed still soft, yet everything felt empty. Every morning, Mr. Thomas made himself a cup of coffee and watched the sun rise above the trees. He listened to the birds, to the wind, and sometimes to the faraway sound of cars passing by. The world continued to move, but inside his little house, time seemed to stop. Mr. Thomas had been a history teacher for 35 years. His students loved him because he made history feel alive. He talked about courage, freedom, and people who never gave up. When he retired, the school gave him a clock, a simple gift for a man who had given his life to teaching. Now that clock ticked slowly on the wall, its quiet sound echoing in the stillness of the room. His daughter Emily lived far away in New York. She was a nurse with 2 small boys. Every Sunday she called him on the phone. Their talks were short. "Hi, Dad. How are you? The boys are loud today. I'll call again next week." Mr. Thomas always smiled and said, "Take care. I love you." But sometimes the call ended before he could finish his sentence. One Sunday evening, after another short call, he sat down in his favorite chair and opened an old photo album. Dust covered the cover, but when he opened it, the pages came alive with memories: his wedding day, their first car, their baby girl family dinners, and school trips. Each picture told a story, a piece of his life that now felt far away. He touched one photograph, Margaret standing under a tree laughing. Her eyes shone with joy. A single tear fell onto the page, but he didn't wipe it away. He whispered softly, "Is this all that's left? Just memories and silence?" Then something caught his attention. On the small wooden table beside him lay a white envelope. It had arrived earlier that week, but he hadn't opened it yet. The handwriting was familiar, old-fashioned, strong, and a little shaky. It was from Jack, his childhood friend. He slowly opened the envelope and began to read. "Dear Thomas, it's been a long time. I hope you're doing well. We've moved to a small town by the ocean in California. The air is fresh, and every morning I walk along the beach. It's peaceful here. My wife and I would love to have you visit. We have a guest room, and I think you'd like it here. We can talk, laugh, and remember old times. Please think about it, my friend. It would be good for you. Your old friend Jack." Mr. Thomas placed the letter on his lap and looked out the window. The evening sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. The street outside was empty, but inside his heart something began to move, something soft and unfamiliar. It wasn't happiness yet. It wasn't excitement. But it felt like the beginning of hope. He stood by the window for a long time, thinking about the years that had passed, the students he had taught, the family he rarely saw, and the silence that had become his only companion. Then he whispered to himself, "Maybe it's not too late. Maybe I still have something left to do." That night, Mr. Thomas went to bed with the letter still in his hand. For the first time in months, he slept deeply and peacefully. Outside, the moon shone brightly, and the stars looked down on his quiet little house. Somewhere far away, a new journey was waiting, one he didn't yet know he would take. The morning light came softly through the curtains, painting the room gold. Mr. Thomas opened his eyes slowly, feeling a calm he hadn't known in years. The letter from Jack still lay on his bedside table. He picked it up again, reading each line carefully. The words felt warm, like a hand reaching out from the past. "You should come and stay with us for a while." That sentence stayed in his mind. He made his usual cup of coffee, but this time he didn't sit on the porch. Instead, he looked around his house, the photos on the wall, the empty chair, the clock ticking steadily. Everything looked the same, yet something inside him had changed. He imagined the ocean, the sound of waves, and the smell of salt in the air. It had been many years since he'd seen the sea. By the afternoon, the decision was clear. He would go. He took an old brown suitcase from the closet and began to pack. He didn't bring much, just clothes, his photo album, and Jack's letter. Before closing the suitcase, he added one last thing, a framed picture of Margaret smiling. "You're coming with me," he whispered with a soft smile. 2 days later, Mr. Thomas stood at the bus station. The wind was cool and people hurried around him, young travelers, families with children, and workers heading to new places. He felt small in the crowd, but also strangely alive. It had been so long since he had felt movement purpose. In his hand was a one-way ticket to California. When the bus arrived large and white, he stepped on slowly and found a seat by the window. As the engine started, he looked out at the town he had called home for over 30 years. The grocery store on the corner, the school where he had taught, the park where Emily had played as a little girl, they all passed by like scenes from a dream. He didn't feel sadness this time, only quiet gratitude. He whispered, "Thank you," as the town disappeared behind him. The journey was long. Outside, the window fields, rivers, and small towns rolled by like chapters in a storybook. At one stop, a young man sat beside him. He was in his 20s, wearing a denim jacket and carrying a guitar. He smiled and said, "Hi, sir. I'm Leo. Going far?" Mr. Thomas nodded. "California." Leo's eyes brightened. "Really, me too. I'm going to Los Angeles. I want to be a musician." At first, they didn't talk much. Leo put on his headphones, lost in his music. But after a few hours, he removed them and turned to Mr. Thomas again. "So, what brings you to California?" Mr. Thomas hesitated for a moment, then said softly, "An old friend. He invited me to visit. I think I just need a change." Leo nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, sometimes that's what we all need, a change." The two began to talk more. Mr. Thomas told him about his years as a teacher and about Margaret. Leo listened carefully, his young face serious. "That's beautiful," he said quietly. "Most people wait too long to live again." That sentence stayed with Mr. Thomas for the rest of the trip, to live again. When the bus stopped for lunch, Leo helped him carry his suitcase. They shared a table at a small roadside diner and ate burgers and fries. Mr. Thomas hadn't eaten fast food in years, but somehow it tasted good, maybe because this time he wasn't eating alone. After 2 days of travel, the bus finally entered California. The sky was bright and endless, and palm trees lined the roads like tall green guards. When they reached the station, Mr. Thomas felt nervous but also curious. He stepped off the bus and looked around at the new world waiting for him. Then he saw a familiar face. Jack stood near an old blue car, waving both arms. "Thomas!" he shouted, his voice full of joy. "You look exactly the same." Mr. Thomas smiled and walked toward him. The two old friends hugged tightly, years of silence melting away in that single moment. "I'm so glad you came," Jack said, his eyes shining. Mr. Thomas didn't have many words, but his smile said everything. This wasn't just a visit, it was a beginning. As they drove away from the station, Jack talked excitedly about his town, a small, peaceful place near the ocean. The houses were simple, the people friendly, and the air smelled of salt and pine. Mr. Thomas looked out the window, watching the sunlight dance on the waves in the distance. He felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time, a quiet, growing sense of possibility. The road ahead was unknown, but it felt right. Maybe this was what hope looked like, not loud or bright, but soft, gentle, and alive. The road to Jack's house followed the coastline. The ocean sparkled under the afternoon sun, and the wind carried the scent of salt and flowers. Mr. Thomas leaned back in his seat, watching the world pass by. Every mile took him farther from the loneliness of Ohio and closer to something new. Jack's house stood near the water, painted white with a red roof and surrounded by small gardens full of yellow and pink flowers. It wasn't big, but it felt warm, alive, like the kind of place that welcomed stories and laughter. On the porch stood a woman waving cheerfully. "That's Linda, my wife," Jack said. Linda smiled warmly when she saw Mr. Thomas. "Welcome, Mr. Thomas. We're so happy you're here." Her voice was soft and kind, the kind that made you feel at home even when you were far away. Inside the house smelled of lemon and sea breeze. The furniture was simple, wooden, and full of character. On the walls were family photos and paintings of the beach. In the living room, a large window opened toward the ocean. From there, Mr. Thomas could see the waves rolling gently across the sand. Linda brought tea and cookies to the table. "You must be tired after such a long trip," she said. A little, he admitted, smiling. "But it's a good kind of tired." Jack laughed. "Good. You'll get used to the rhythm here: morning walks, good food, and friendly people. No rush, no noise, no stress." That evening after dinner, Mr. Thomas sat alone on the porch. The air was cool and the sound of the waves reached him softly. He watched the horizon turn gold and pink as the sun went down. For years, his nights had been silent, heavy with memories. But now the silence felt different, calm, peaceful. He closed his eyes and listened to the music of the ocean. For the first time in years, he felt the weight in his heart begin to lift. The next morning, Jack suggested they take a walk through the town. The streets were narrow, lined with small shops and colorful flowers. Everyone seemed to know Jack. "Morning, Jack," people called. "How's the garden?" Jack waved to everyone with a grin. "Morning, everything's growing fine." He turned to Mr. Thomas. "See, you can't stay lonely here. Even the seagulls would talk to you if you gave them a chance." They stopped at a small cafe near the beach. The walls were painted blue, and the air smelled of coffee and fresh bread. A young woman with bright eyes came to take their order. Her name was Maya. "What can I get you today, gentlemen?" she asked cheerfully. Jack ordered coffee for both of them, and when she turned to Mr. Thomas, she smiled. "Are you new here?" "Yes," he said. "Just visiting for now." "What did you do before you retired?" she asked. "I was a teacher," he replied. "I taught history for many years." Maya laughed softly. "Oh, my little brother hates history. Maybe you can change his mind." Mr. Thomas smiled. "Maybe I can try." When they left the cafe, Jack pointed to a building near the town square. "That's the community center," he said. "People come there to read play music and sometimes help the kids with homework. You should come one day. They'd love to meet you." They stepped inside for a quick visit. The center was filled with laughter and energy: children drawing pictures, older people reading newspapers, volunteers talking quietly. The air was full of life. A little boy looked up from a table and asked, "Are you a new teacher?" Mr. Thomas chuckled. "Maybe. Are you a good student?" The boy grinned and ran back to his group. Jack watched them with a knowing smile. "You see, Thomas, they already like you." That evening after dinner, Mr. Thomas sat again by the window of his room, the ocean glowing silver in the moonlight. On the small desk beside him lay his photo of Margaret. He picked it up and whispered, "You'd like it here." He thought about Jack's words about the people he had met and about the boy's question, "Are you a new teacher?" He hadn't thought about teaching again since retiring. But something inside him began to stir, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time: purpose. He opened a notebook and wrote down a single line, "This is not retirement. This is my return." Then he looked out at the endless waves, steady and alive, moving without fear or pause. The world was still beautiful, and maybe there was still a place for him in it. That night, as the waves whispered softly against the shore, Mr. Thomas fell asleep with a quiet smile on his face. Morning sunlight touched the walls of Mr. Thomas's room. The sound of waves drifted through the open window, and the smell of fresh bread from Linda's kitchen filled the air. He sat by the window with a cup of tea in his hands, watching seagulls glide above the ocean. For the first time in many years, he woke up feeling calm and curious about the day ahead. On the small table lay his notebook open to the words he had written the night before. "This is not retirement. This is my return." He smiled faintly, tracing the words with his finger. It wasn't just a thought anymore. It was a promise. Later that day, Jack knocked on his door. "Hey, Thomas, some kids at the community center are asking about you. Want to come with me?" Mr. Thomas hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I think I'd like that." When they arrived, the room was full of color and laughter. Children were drawing maps, cutting paper, and reading picture books. A young volunteer named Maya, the same girl from the cafe, was helping them. When she saw Mr. Thomas, she waved. "Ah, our new teacher is here." The children turned their heads. "Are you really a teacher?" one boy asked. Mr. Thomas chuckled. "I used to be, but maybe I still am if someone wants to learn." The boy grinned and pointed to a large globe on the table. "Can you show me where Italy is?" Mr. Thomas walked over slowly and turned the globe with gentle fingers. "Here," he said, tapping the spot. "This little boot-shaped country is Italy. Do you know what's special about it?" The boy shook his head. Mr. Thomas smiled. It's a place full of art stories and history. People there once built an empire that changed the world. History is full of lessons that help us understand who we are. The children leaned closer, their eyes bright with curiosity. For years he had spoken to empty rooms, to memories and photographs. But now he was speaking to young minds again, and they were listening. When the session ended, one of the children said, "You should come every week." Mr. Thomas laughed softly. "We'll see about that." But in his heart, he already knew he would. That evening after dinner, he sat on the porch again. The sky was painted orange and pink, and the waves whispered softly below. Jack joined him, carrying 2 cups of tea. "You looked happy today," Jack said. "I was," Mr. Thomas replied quietly. "I forgot how good it feels to teach, to be useful." Jack smiled. "You never stopped being useful, old friend. You just needed the right place to start again." The next morning, Mr. Thomas opened a small wooden box he had brought from Ohio. Inside were 5 letters written by Margaret. He had never been brave enough to read them after she died. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the first one. The ink had faded, but her handwriting was still soft and graceful. "My dear Thomas," the letter began, "thank you for being my quiet strength. You don't say much, but I always feel your heart. If I ever leave this world before you, please keep living. Don't stop walking, don't stop teaching. The world needs you." His eyes filled with tears. He pressed the paper to his chest and whispered, "I stopped walking, Margaret. But maybe now I'm learning again." Later that day, he returned to the community center. The children greeted him with bright smiles. He taught them about courage, kindness, and the beauty of learning from the past. When he spoke, his voice was steady, full of warmth and quiet power. That night, he didn't open the photo album as he used to. He didn't need to. The memories that once made him cry now made him feel alive. He looked out the window and whispered, "Margaret, your love is still here. And I'll carry it forward, one child, one story, one step at a time." As the waves rolled in and out under the moonlight, Mr. Thomas sat silently, his heart full of peace. The past no longer hurt the same way. It had become part of him, not as pain, but as purpose. The next day, Jack found him sitting on the beach, notebook in handwriting again. "What are you working on?" Jack asked. Mr. Thomas smiled. "A story. Not about history this time. About life. About second chances." Jack chuckled. "That's a story worth telling." Mr. Thomas nodded. "And worth living." As the waves touched the shore, the 2 old friends sat together, listening to the sea, the same sea that had carried Mr. Thomas to his new beginning. The following week, the community center buzzed with excitement. Colorful paper banners hung from the ceiling chairs were placed in neat rows, and a sign at the front read, "Story Evening. Guest speaker, Mr. Thomas." When Jack told him about it, Mr. Thomas had shaken his head. "Oh no, I haven't spoken in front of a crowd in years." Linda had smiled kindly. "You don't need to perform, Thomas. Just tell one story from your heart." And so, here he was standing backstage with trembling hands, holding a few handwritten notes. His heart beat quickly, but when he looked out at the children waiting at the parents, whispering softly at Jack and Linda, smiling from the back row, something inside him settled. He took a deep breath and walked forward. The audience clapped as he stepped onto the small wooden stage. He looked around the room, faces of all ages, eyes filled with expectation. He smiled and began. "My name is Thomas," he said quietly. "For 35 years I was a history teacher. I loved my job. I loved stories about people who faced hardship and found strength. But 5 years ago, I lost someone I loved deeply, my wife Margaret. And when she was gone, I forgot how to speak. I forgot how to live." The room was still. Even the children were silent. "I spent years in a quiet house surrounded by memories, but no laughter," he continued. "Then one day I received a letter from a friend, a simple invitation to come and see the ocean. I almost said no. But that letter, that small piece of paper, changed everything. It brought me here." He paused, smiling softly at Jack. "I found waves, I found peace, and I found all of you." A few people wiped their eyes. Mr. Thomas continued, his voice steady now. "I realized something. It's never too late to start again. Pain doesn't mean the story is over. Sometimes it's just a new chapter waiting to begin." He turned toward the children in the front row. "When you grow up, you'll face hard days. Everyone does. But remember this: your voice matters. Your story matters. And one day your words may help someone else stand again. For a moment the room was quiet, the good kind of quiet full of feeling. Then the audience began to clap. Slowly at first, then louder, stronger, until everyone was standing. A small girl ran to the stage and hugged him. "That was beautiful," she said softly. Afterward, many people came to speak to him. A woman told him, "I lost my husband last year. You gave me hope tonight." A teenage boy said, "I want to be a teacher like you." Mr. Thomas listened to them, all his eyes gentle, his heart open. That night, as he walked home beside Jack under a sky full of stars, he felt lighter than he had in years. "You were amazing," Jack said, patting his shoulder. Mr. Thomas smiled. "I didn't expect to feel this alive again." Jack looked at him with warmth. "That's what second journeys do. They don't take you back, they take you forward." In the days that followed, something wonderful began to happen. The people in town started greeting him everywhere he went. Children waved from bicycles. Maya at the cafe gave him free coffee and said, "My grandma cried when you spoke. She said you reminded her that life still has color." Then one morning Jack received a call from the principal of the local school, Mrs. Lang. "We heard Mr. Thomas speak last week," she said. "Would he be willing to visit our school and talk to the students?" When Jack told him, Mr. Thomas laughed. "Are you sure they want to hear an old man talk about history?" Jack grinned. "They don't want history, they want you." So the next Monday, Mr. Thomas walked into a classroom for the first time in 5 years. The smell of chalk and paper filled the air. Drawings of planets and trees covered the walls. A dozen bright-eyed students stared at him, whispering excitedly. Mrs. Lang introduced him. "Class, this is Mr. Thomas. He's going to talk to us about courage." He stood in front of the class and smiled gently. "Courage," he began, "isn't about being brave all the time. It's about standing up when you're scared or kind when it's easier to be silent." He told them about Abraham Lincoln, Rosa Parks, and Martin Luther King Jr., people who had changed the world through quiet strength. The students listened without moving. Some took notes. Some just watched, their eyes wide with wonder. When he finished, the class applauded. One boy raised his hand and asked, "Sir, can you come again next week?" Mr. Thomas looked at Mrs. Lang. She smiled. "We'd love to have you every week." That evening, Linda made spaghetti and garlic bread for dinner. "We heard you were a hit," she said, laughing. Jack added, "Mrs. Lang wants you to start a weekly history club. I told her you'd think about it." Mr. Thomas smiled. "I don't need to think. I'll do it. It's not work, it's joy." That weekend, the townspeople organized a small surprise in the park. When Mr. Thomas arrived, he saw children holding handmade cards. One little girl stepped forward and handed him a big white card that read, "Thank you for teaching us how to be brave." Behind her, a board was covered with notes from students. Each one carried a message: "You made me love history. You helped my mom smile again. I want to teach like you one day." Mr. Thomas read every note carefully. His eyes filled with tears, but he didn't hide them. Jack placed a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't just find your second journey," he said softly. "You gave one to all of us." The sun was setting behind the ocean, bathing everything in gold. Mr. Thomas looked around at the faces, young and old, full of light and gratitude. He took a deep breath and whispered to himself, "I'm not just living again. I'm helping others begin." Time passed gently in the little coastal town. The days flowed one into another like the calm rhythm of the waves. Mr. Thomas had found his place, his purpose, and his peace. Every morning he walked along the beach with Jack. Every Monday he helped at the school. Every Friday he read stories with the children at the community center. His steps were slower now, but his spirit was steady and full. People in town no longer saw him as a visitor or a retired teacher. They saw him as something more, a friend, a guide, and a quiet light. When people spoke his name, it carried warmth. Mr. Thomas helped me with my essay. Mr. Thomas listened when I was sad. Mr. Thomas says hope is something you practice every day. He had become a part of the town's heartbeat. One gray afternoon, Mr. Thomas stopped at the small cafe by the ocean, his favorite spot. He always sat at the same table by the window with his notebook open and a cup of coffee beside him. Maya smiled as she brought his usual order. "It's getting cloudy today," she said. He nodded. "That's all right. The rain makes the sea sing." Just as he was about to write the bell over, the door rang. A tall man walked in, thin with gray hair and tired eyes. His coat was old and his shoulders were heavy as if carrying years of regret. Mr. Thomas looked up and froze. The man was his brother Robert. For a moment the cafe disappeared. There was only silence, memory, and the sharp ache of the past. 20 years had passed since the last time he saw Robert, the day Robert took the money their parents had left for both of them and vanished. No letter, no call, nothing. Robert looked around uncertainly, then his eyes met Thomas's. He froze too. Time seemed to stop between them. Slowly, Robert walked closer. "Thomas," he said quietly, "I didn't know if I'd ever find you again. But I had to try." Mr. Thomas's heart pounded, his breath caught. His first instinct was to leave to protect the fragile peace he had built, but something kept him still. Robert sat down across from him, his voice shaking. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I was young. I was stupid. I thought I could turn that money into something big, a business, a dream. But I failed. And I was too ashamed to come back. Every day I thought about you." Mr. Thomas said nothing. He looked at his brother's worn face, at the lines carved by years of guilt and wandering. The anger he had carried for decades began to loosen its grip. "You didn't just take money," Mr. Thomas finally said. His voice was quiet but firm. "You took my peace." Robert nodded, his eyes filling with tears. "I know, and I've lived with that every day since." They sat in silence. The sound of coffee cups and ocean waves filled the room, soft and real. For the first time in 20 years, there was no shouting, no blame, only truth. Mr. Thomas thought of the children he taught, of the lessons he gave about courage and kindness. He thought of Margaret's letter, "Don't stop walking. The world needs you." And he realized that forgiveness was not weakness. It was strength, the kind that sets two hearts free. He took a deep breath. "I don't forget what you did," he said slowly, "but I'm tired of carrying it. And I think you are too." Robert's voice broke. "Yeah, I am." Then Mr. Thomas said softly, "Let's begin again, not as the men we were, but as brothers who have lost enough already." Robert covered his face with his hands, crying openly. Mr. Thomas didn't cry, but he felt something deep inside him break and heal at the same time. The years of bitterness washed away like footprints in the sand after the tide comes in. They walked out of the cafe together, side by side. Not laughing, not talking much, but walking together finally. The gray sky began to clear, and a small beam of light shone through the clouds. That evening, Mr. Thomas sat by the shore, notebook in hand. He wrote slowly, his handwriting neat and calm. "Some storms don't come to destroy us. Some come to clean the air." He closed the notebook and looked at the horizon. The waves moved endlessly, rising and falling, always finding their way back to shore. And for the first time in decades, Mr. Thomas had his brother beside him again. In the months that followed, Robert stayed in town. He helped at the community center, repairing old chairs and painting the walls. People didn't know their full story, but when Mr. Thomas introduced him one day at the school and said, "This is my brother," the room filled with applause. It wasn't just forgiveness, it was healing. Time moved on, and so did life. Mr. Thomas continued to teach, to write, to share his stories. But one morning as he walked along the beach, he carried with him a small wooden box. Inside were the things that told his life's story, a letter from Margaret, a student's drawing, and a photo of his classroom long ago. He placed the box under a tree near the water and whispered, "Someone will find this someday, and they'll know what love looks like." The town built a small room in the school library and named it the Story Corner. At its entrance, a wooden sign read, "Every ending is the start of something else, Mr. Thomas." Children filled that room every day, reading, writing, dreaming. On the wall hung the words of the man who had once thought his story was over. One evening, as the sun turned the sky into gold, a little girl from the neighborhood came to his porch holding a book. "Mr. Thomas," she said, "can I read to you tonight?" He smiled and nodded. "Yes, please." As her small voice filled the air, he leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, listening. The waves whispered. The wind touched his face. And in that quiet moment, Mr. Thomas knew his second journey wasn't ending. It had simply become a path for others to follow. "Thank you for listening to a second journey," he would have said, if this were a story told aloud. If you enjoyed it, please like, share, subscribe, and comment below. See you in the next video.